The moment the invasion fleet landed, the skies above the North American continent dimmed beneath the angular shadows of Zarkith-class warships. They hovered like metallic leviathans, silent save for the low, thrumming pulse of gravitational stabilizers. On board, Commander Virex of the 9th Galactic Suppression Legion examined his tactical holomap with growing boredom. Estimated resistance, nil, his adjutant said. Local males have either fled or fallen. Remaining population consists of juvenile bipeds and biological incubators. Females, Virex corrected with a mechanical snort. Human females. Fragile, emotional. Strategically irrelevant. He didn't bother to mask his disdain. The conquest of Earth had been expected to last a year. It took 4 months. Their armies, uncoordinated and emotionally reactive, folded like collapsing scaffolds. The only puzzling detail in the report was the number of female civilians still unaccounted for, nearly 62%. Most likely hiding, the adjutant offered, tapping a talon against the data screen. Primitive shelter instincts. Virex narrowed his eyes, then flushed them out. This planet ends today. The first ground squad touched down in what remained of a suburban sprawl once called Arlington, Virginia. The houses were too symmetrical, the silence too deliberate. No plasma turrets, no defensive cannons. Only rows of flower gardens and swing sets. Artificial tranquility. It irritated Virex immediately. He monitored the squad's helmet feed. Their 6-limbed armor suits lumbered forward, scanning for signatures. A redwood-colored mailbox chirped once, then went dead. The signal had been intercepted, rerouted, somehow. Unregistered anomaly detected. Directive, a trooper asked. Proceed, Virex replied. This sector is sterile. That's when she stepped out onto the porch. She wore a pink bathrobe, fluffy, like some kind of earth comfort wear. One hand gripped a steaming mug labeled World's Okayest Mom. Blonde hair tied up in a loose bun. Unarmed, barefoot. And she was smiling. The trooper raised his arm cannon. She blinked slowly, took a sip of her coffee, and said, "You boys lost." Her voice was syrupy, polite, dripping with layered meaning their translators barely grasped. The feed stuttered, language calibration error. Emotion, undetermined. Threat level, unknown. Identify yourself, the trooper demanded. I'm Sarah, she replied. I teach 3rd grade. Or did, until your lot vaporized the school. Not very neighborly, was it? One of the troopers took a step forward. His foot hit a garden gnome that shattered and triggered a localized EMP. His systems blinked, jammed, went dark. Virex stood from his command chair. What was that? No answer. Then static. Then screaming. One by one, the feed links dropped. Not from enemy weapons, but from cascading internal system errors. Sarah still stood on her porch. She didn't move. The last image captured by the downed squad showed her calmly setting down the mug, stepping over one of their collapsed bodies, and saying, "You shouldn't have come to my neighborhood." Virex dispatched 3 more squads to the sector. None returned. Within the hour, 27 similar reports filtered in from across the continent. Female civilians not fleeing, but advancing. Unarmed, unarmored, and yet overwhelmingly effective. In Minnesota, a group of yoga instructors disabled an entire orbital drone network using nothing but outdated Wi-Fi routers and collective breathwork. In San Diego, a trio of retired grandmothers rerouted a planetary targeting satellite through a garage-based knitting circle. In Portland, a single mother with a toddler in one arm hijacked an Empire skiff, used it to drop leaflets over alien bases containing psychological triggers adapted from Earth rom-coms. The reports made no sense. They didn't need weapons. They used language, tone, timing, eye contact, and kindness sharpened like a blade. Virex called an emergency council with his officers. They're civilians, he snapped. What in the 7th nebula is happening? Unknown, Commander, came the reply. They behave erratically, but there is coordination. How? They're not using digital communication. All analog, hand signals, code words, cooking recipes. Virex froze. Cooking recipes? Yes, Commander. Our translators intercepted a message disguised as a banana bread recipe. Once decoded, it contained exact tactical coordinates of one of our supply drops. The location was compromised 15 minutes later. The silence hung heavy. Virex clenched his fists. What are they? No one answered. Later that day, an elite capture unit surrounded a quiet farmhouse in the outskirts of Missouri. Inside, their scans located a single female, age 42, no weapons, no defenses. Virex watched through the recon drone feed as they breached the door. She was reading a paperback novel and didn't look up. Ma'am, you are under detainment by Galactic Authority, a soldier said. She flipped a page. You boys ever seen steel magnolias? What? Too late. The house exploded in a flash of electromagnetic pulse and floral-scented vapor. The woman vanished. The recon drone picked up a final whisper, transmitted directly to Virex's bridge. You think the men taught us to fight? Sweetheart, we taught them. He stared at the words. No species evolves this fast. No resistance adapts without structure. No emotional, chaos-prone creatures could coordinate at this scale. Could they? Back on Earth, Sarah returned to her living room. She reloaded her dishwasher, sat back down, and tapped into a frequency only she and a few thousand others knew. Her fingers drummed against the table in a pattern, a language far older than code. 3 beeps, a pause. 2 more. Then silence. Across the planet, thousands of women mirrored the rhythm. The plan was working. Sarah's comms blinked once. We've got them rattled, came a voice from a grandmother in South Dakota. They still think we're soft, said a teenage girl from Texas. I've been feeding their AI nothing but reruns of Golden Girls and Mean Girls. They're starting to confuse sarcasm with strategic threats. Laughter. Then, resolve. The network wasn't military. It wasn't even formal. It was something older, deeper, unwritten, and instinctive. For centuries, women had adapted to survive in worlds that didn't understand them. Now, finally, they were in a world they didn't understand. The galaxy. And it was about to learn what Dormant really meant. Back in orbit, Virex issued a fleet-wide directive. All female humans are to be considered Class 5 irregular combatants. Non-standard threat profile. Do not engage unless explicitly ordered. But it was too late. Every time they tried to predict them, human women pivoted. When they attempted to isolate them, they grew stronger. When they thought they'd won, the women reorganized, repurposed, retaliated. It was no longer a mop-up op. It was a war they never saw coming. And they were losing. On Earth, Sarah walked to the front lawn and looked up at the sky. Empire ships still blotted the clouds, but the silence was no longer theirs. It belonged to the resistance below. A little girl on a scooter rolled past, waving a toy wand. Sarah waved back, then turned to the sky. You're going to have to try harder, she said softly, voice like a warning cloaked in honey. Inside her home, the last remaining piece of alien tech, the one the Empire didn't know she had, began to blink. She opened the comms channel. To them, it would sound like noise. Static. A woman humming a lullaby. But to others, like her, the message was clear. Phase 2 begins at dawn. And, in orbit, Virex felt something alien crawl through his system. It wasn't fear. His kind didn't feel fear. But maybe, just maybe, it was something worse. Doubt. Something about this species defied logic. They smiled too much. They asked too many questions. They hid knives and kindness and turned emotions into war machines. This wasn't a final invasion. It was an awakening. And Sarah? She was done waiting. She sipped her coffee and whispered to herself with a wry smile. Time to remind the galaxy who really raises the warriors. Then she sat back down and made banana bread. The dropship's side panel hissed open with a hydraulic exhale, and the 4 Zarkith enforcers stepped onto Earth soil for the first time. Towering in obsidian armor with cobalt faceplates, their movements were heavy, calculated, and unshakably arrogant. The lead trooper, Unit Reth 9, rotated his shoulder joint, scanning the horizon of suburban Ashbury Heights with casual disdain. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the distance. An educational facility, Reth 9 muttered in disgust. Primitive. Vulnerable. They left their spawn behind. The Imperial directive was clear. Locate and assess all remaining human support structures. Neutralize communication hubs. Detain any remnants. Extract usable intelligence. Reth 9 squad had the honor of investigating what was reported as an unguarded cluster of buildings designated primary school. No defensive installations. No adult males. Only caretakers, humans nurturing subclass. He stepped forward across the cracked pavement, the school sign creaking in the breeze. Little Acorn's Learning Center. As the squad approached, movement flickered in the tinted window. A woman stood behind the glass, watching them. She was mid-30s, auburn hair in a simple braid, sleeves rolled up, expression unreadable. She held a child's picture book in one hand. In the other, she casually clicked a red Sharpie. Eyes on a human adult, one of the troopers said. Unarmed. No defensive posture. Non-threatening, Reth 9 confirmed. The front doors clicked and opened on their own. The woman stepped out. They scanned her, no energy signature, no concealed weapons, no exosuit. And yet, she walked with the poise of someone not just undisturbed but expecting them. I'd appreciate it if you didn't track mud on my floors, she said. Her tone was steady, calm, almost bored. She folded her arms. You are the human assigned to this facility? Reth 9 asked. Miss Keller, kindergarten teacher, class of 12. You will surrender the younglings and submit to relocation for reconditioning. Miss Keller tilted her head. No, no. She stepped closer, hands still empty. Let me explain something. You're walking into a building full of 5-year-olds. If you so much as raise your voice, you will awaken something far worse than your plasma rifles can handle. Reth 9 took a step forward. You are delaying the inevitable. Am I? She replied, voice now a thread of steel. He scanned again. No weapons. No backup. But something in her body language triggered his combat instincts. An anomaly in posture analysis. Subtle shift in weight, minute adjustment of breath. Threat assessment algorithms flickered. Then a burst of static across his internal comms. They were jammed. One of the troopers turned. Interference. Signal scrambling from inside the building. Miss Keller smiled. Our art room has Wi-Fi. And a 6-year-old who can code better than your fleet engineers. That is unacceptable, she finished for him. That's what I thought you'd say. Reth 9 raised his rifle. And the front lawn exploded. Not with fire, not with shrapnel, but with sound. A high-frequency blast of harmonics that vibrated deep within their suits. Their HUDs flickered. Targeting systems danced like static on an old television. The source? A swing set. Retrofit with subsonic disruptors disguised as playground equipment. A child's toy turned into an EMP pulse. Miss Keller didn't flinch. One trooper staggered. Another collapsed as his armor systems shut down. Reth 9 tried to stabilize, but his visual feed fractured, overloaded by flashing, randomized patterns on the building's digital billboard. Welcome to Acorn Day. Blinked in pastel letters. It wasn't a message. It was a neurological assault designed for their species' cognitive processors. We told you, she said almost softly. We raise the humans who fight your wars. He aimed his weapon. You will submit. A blur of motion. She threw the red Sharpie. It struck the barrel of his rifle, not hard enough to damage it, but enough to jolt his aim just as the discharge triggered. The plasma shot veered off course and vaporized the stop sign across the street. Then a second anomaly. The children. They were watching. Through windows, behind blinds, peeking from safe rooms. They weren't crying. They weren't afraid. They were waiting. And Miss Keller? She was already moving. She lunged into his range, twisted, grabbed the side panel of his armor, and flipped him using his own balance against him. Her bare hands. Combat metrics screamed through his processors. No human of her mass should have had that kind of torque. She yanked a short-range comms jack from his belt and plugged it into the school's intercom system. Then she spoke. Room 4, go. From inside the building came a chorus of mechanical hums. Science projects, solar kits, toy robots, and 3D printed gadgets, activated as one. They weren't toys. One launched a drone swarm made from old calculators. Another triggered a magnetic burst that pulled the remaining 2 enforcers to the metal playground fence, immobilizing them. The third zone weapon was disassembled by a tiny caterpillar-tracked bot rolling out from the bushes, labeled in crayon, Mr. Wiggles, Doom Edition. Miss Keller pulled the helmet off the dazed Reth 9. She crouched low, looking into the flat black of his alien eyes. You think we're just caretakers? She asked. Reth 9 struggled to form a response. His command protocols were jumbled, his interface fried. She stood. I'm not a soldier, she said, but I know 1,000 ways to break an enemy before they ever fire a shot. You know why? Silence. Because I've been managing toddlers for 15 years. A moment passed. Then she raised her voice just slightly. Room 5, code yellow. The school doors opened, and a dozen children came outside. Calm. Focused. Each held a part, some a circuit, some a signal jammer. One carried a teddy bear rigged with what could only be a proximity warning system. Go ahead, Miss Keller said to them. Rebuild the signal scrambler. We've got 10 minutes before they send more. The kids nodded and began working. To Reth 9, it felt surreal, like some twisted hallucination. They were training children to counter a galactic invasion, and succeeding. His internal logs barely functioned, but what he could capture, he sent. Back in orbit, Commander Virex stared at the fragmented data feed. Repeat transmission, he said. Static. Then, educational facility compromise caretakers anomalous tactical suppression failed. No visuals. No telemetry. No survivors. One image finally loaded. A child drawing on a sidewalk with chalk, waving at the camera. The message scrawled beside her read, You messed with the wrong planet. Virex turned to his command advisors. They are indoctrinating their young. No, one said. They are arming them. We detected no weapons. They don't need weapons. Silence. Virex's claws tightened against the railing. We misread the species, he said. One of the tactical analysts, still uncertain, still reeling, whispered, They're not just resilient. They're adaptive. Virex dismissed the room, turned to the window. Below, Earth spun calmly in the void. But now it was different. Now, it wasn't the human armies he feared. Not the special forces. Not the orbital tech. It was the women. The ones they assumed were docile, dormant. He could still hear that woman's voice, calm, measured, terrifying in its certainty. We raise the humans who fight your wars. And worse, he could hear the children. They weren't running. They were learning. On Earth, Miss Keller watched the last spark of the broken dropship fizzle out in the distance. She'd sent the children back inside. Lunch hour. Peanut butter and jelly for most. Gluten-free for Madison. Liam was allergic to tree nuts. Important to remember. She sat on the school's front steps, took out her planner, and began grading alphabet worksheets. Her hand shook slightly, but she smiled. The war wasn't over, but something had shifted. Across Earth, the reports came in. Teachers, nurses, grandmothers, librarians, women who had spent lifetimes dismissed as soft power, now becoming the architects of humanity's last stand. No command centers. No armies. Just kitchens turned into intel hubs. PDA meetings disguised as tactical briefings. Empathy turned into encryption. Patience weaponized. Because when the world burned, they didn't scream. They organized. And as the sun dipped behind the clouds and another Zarkith cruiser loomed overhead, Miss Keller didn't flinch. She just circled the backwards R on the paper in front of her, shook her head, and muttered, Sloppy. You can do better, writer. Behind her, a child's voice called out, Miss Keller, the comms relay's ready. Good, she said. Let's say hello, shall we? The section ends not with an explosion, not with a battle, but with something far more terrifying. A motherly voice echoing across the alien fleet's comms, calm and unwavering. This is Earth. You came for a fight, but you landed in a classroom, and class is now in session. And in that moment, Commander Virex felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't fear. It was realization. They hadn't invaded a planet. They'd interrupted a lesson. The Imperial chamber aboard the flagship Vox Ultima had never hosted a human. Not willingly. Not unshackled. Not like this. She sat alone at the far end of the Obsidian chamber, surrounded by 27 members of the Galactic Empire's High Dominion. Her posture was relaxed, but not casual. Her back was straight, hands folded neatly in her lap, ankles crossed. Her eyes roamed slowly over each alien face, as if selecting which to disarm first. A single guard stood beside her, useless. She didn't need shackles. Her presence was the weapon. She wore no armor, just a navy blue blazer, blouse, and press pants, what Earth once called business casual. Her ID badge still read, Ambassador Elaine Park, Human Terran Council. A job title rendered obsolete the day Earth skies filled with steel. And yet here she was not just surviving, but unnerving the most feared political tribunal in the known galaxy. Elaine blinked slowly. Her calm was deliberate, calculated. Like she had read the end of the book, while everyone else still fumbled with Chapter 1. You may begin, one of the counselors rasped. His voice resembled static, filtered through bone. Explain your purpose. I thought the invite was self-explanatory, she said, her voice warm, not saccharine measured. You offered peace talks. I'm here to talk. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. They weren't used to being spoken to like equals, let alone by prey species. A different counselor leaned forward. His jaw was segmented and constantly shifted as he spoke. You humans negotiate only when cornered. You have no leverage. Elaine raised an eyebrow. You've invaded our planet, crippled our systems, leveled our cities, and you still don't feel cornered? No reply. Interesting, she said, almost to herself. Usually, the party who starts the fire feels some heat. But maybe you just haven't noticed what's burning yet. Another shift in the room. Minute changes, tentacles twitching, chitin clicking, scales rippling. Elaine saw it all, filed it, weaponized it. She stood. Every head turned. The guard flinched. Elaine took 2 slow steps toward the center of the chamber, heels clicking against the polished floor. Her voice didn't rise. It softened. I'm not here to threaten you. Not in the way you're used to. See, we humans, we don't always strike with force. We strike with meaning, with connection. We turn empathy into architecture, into movement, into revolution. The word echoed strangely in the chamber, revolution. A concept familiar to them, but rarely practiced. A counselor sneered. Your species is emotional, chaotic. That is not strength. It is instability. Elaine smiled. Yes, and you've mistaken that for weakness. But let me ask you, how many wars have you won by understanding your enemy's pain? Confusion blinked across the Dominion, not because they didn't know war, but because they didn't understand the question. Elaine took another step. When your fleet crushed our defenses, our women didn't panic. They grieved, but they didn't panic. They adapted. They learned. And then they taught. One of the counselors made a low, guttural sound. They are not soldiers. No. They're worse, she said gently. They're mothers, lovers, sisters, teachers. They remember everything. And you gave them something they haven't had in generations. Permission to stop pretending. Another silence. Elaine let it breathe. She pulled something from her jacket pocket. A photo. She held it up without a word. It showed 3 girls, ages 6 to 10, smiling with missing teeth and marker-stained fingers. Behind them, a burned-out city skyline. This was taken last week, Elaine said. In what used to be Boston. Those girls built their own solar repeater to send distress signals off-world. No training, just instinct. How? A counselor asked, almost despite himself. Elaine's gaze sharpened. Because their mothers taught them to. The women you assumed were dormant, are rebuilding faster than you can destroy. They're not waiting for orders. They're making their own. You imply coordination, but our surveillance detects no command structure. That's the point, she said, voice dropping to a near whisper. You expect resistance to look like you. Uniforms, ranks, rules. Ours looks like a mother bandaging a child with one hand while hacking your drones with the other. The council fell into murmurs, their pheromonal exchanges wafting into the air, unease, suspicion, recalibration. Elaine took a final step forward and stopped at the center of the room. Her posture shifted. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Just present. You think empathy is inefficient, she said. But empathy gives us insight, predictability, leverage. When you hurt someone I love, I don't just hit back. I learn how to make you regret ever thinking I couldn't. One of the eldest among them leaned forward. His voice was a vibration more than a sound. You threaten extinction with sentiment. I offer a mirror, she replied. You look at us and see chaos. I look at you and see creatures terrified of what they can't control. You didn't conquer Earth. You provoked it. At that, the youngest counselor stood. She was unlike the others, slender, blue-skinned, with luminous eyes that pulsed softly. She tilted her head, studying Elaine not with hostility, but curiosity. You carry no weapon, she said. Elaine looked her in the eye. I carry grief, memory, and clarity, weapons that never jam. The young one blinked slowly. You mourn, yet you lead. You speak with fire, but wield warmth. This confuses me. That's because your empire is built on fear, Elaine said gently. Ours is built on loss. But loss, for us, creates legacy. It drives us, evolves us. The young counselor turned to her elders. You said they were emotionally weak, but she is not fragile. She bends around our tactics like light around gravity. Another ripple of discomfort. Elaine saw it. She pressed in. Your translation systems have been failing, she said. Because sarcasm, irony, compassion, all those don't parse cleanly into binary logic. We operate in shades, not absolutes. And our women? They are the masters of those shades. She held their attention now, completely. You decoded our weapons. But you never decoded our relationships. You erased the wrong targets. The oldest one hissed. What are you saying? I'm saying your war is over, she replied. You just haven't accepted it yet. Because the moment you realized our women weren't dormant, it wasn't a tactical failure. It was a spiritual one. No one spoke. Even the air inside the chamber seemed to still. Elaine stepped back toward her chair, sat down, crossed her legs, folded her hands. This is your final offer, she said. Leave Earth. Apologize. Begin reparations. Or stay and lose not just a war, but your entire sense of superiority. They didn't respond. She didn't need them to. The guard beside her, who hadn't moved, finally whispered, Why aren't you afraid? Elaine looked up at him, kindness softening her eyes. Because I've already lost everything. And because I know something you don't. What's that? She smiled. You're starting to listen. In orbit, Commander Virex watched the entire interaction through encrypted relay. Every word, every pause, every detail. His knuckles were white against the edge of the command rail. She manipulates perception like a weapon, he growled. She never raised her voice, the AI officer noted. Yet we are discussing withdrawal for the first time. Virex turned to the view of Earth. She made us feel. That's the threat. On the planet below, across resistance channels, a message spread. Elaine's words, now a rallying cry. Empathy is not surrender. It is strategy. And across the cities and ruins and valleys of Earth, women heard it and smiled. They weren't just fighting. They were teaching. In the chamber, the youngest counselor finally broke the silence. We request time to consider your proposal. Elaine stood. I'll give you 24 hours, she said. That is insufficient. You won't need more. She turned, the guard stepping back instinctively. As the doors opened, Elaine looked over her shoulder one last time. And if you do decide to stay, she asked. A pause. She answered for them. Then we'll teach you something else we're very good at. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Endings. And with that, she walked out, leaving behind silence, confusion, and a single chilling truth. The most dangerous weapon on Earth was never forged. It was raised. The sky above Beijing fractured like glass as a Zarkith warcruiser plummeted from orbit. It didn't crash, it folded, compressed inward by gravitational forces humans didn't fully understand, reversed by someone who did. The impact tremor rippled through the city, sending flocks of birds skyward and quieting the streets below. General Virex watched the wreckage smolder through the tactical viewport on the Vox Ultima, jaw rigid, tendrils twitching. He hadn't spoken in over an hour. Across the bridge, unreadable data scrolled in frantic red script. His warship's AI looped a single phrase. Threat variables no longer matched database parameters. Reclassify enemy species. He dismissed the alert with a swipe of his clawed hand and paced toward the center of the deck. Around him, officers stood silent, alien faces betraying the same creeping horror they would never dare voice aloud. They were losing, but not because Earth's weapons had improved. Because theirs had stopped working. Drones ignored orders. Translation algorithms corrupted. Predictive combat models returned one phrase over and over. Unreliable enemy pattern. Deviant behavior. Tactical improvisation. 94% female originated. Virex's pride stung more than his logic. They had accounted for the Terran military, the orbital defenses, even the artificial intelligence protocols. But they had not accounted for rage forged through restraint, for the quiet vengeance of a species too often overlooked. He hadn't believed the ambassador. Not fully. Not until now. The humans, the women, were no longer reacting. They were orchestrating. In Nebraska, 63 women, who'd once formed the backbone of a sewing collective, had redirected their organizational skills to planetary-scale drone disruption. They weren't pilots. They were planners. The logistics that once ran bake sales now routed tactical strike zones with pin-drop precision. In Kenya, a coalition of midwives had hijacked the Empire's biomonitoring satellites and weaponized them, turning the very data the aliens used to monitor Earth's vitals into a surveillance feedback loop that blinded entire sectors. And in New York, a linguist named Rosa Martinez had taught an entire borough to speak in disinformation, a patchwork dialect of truth and theater that shattered Zarkith comms across a 5-mile radius. Their language models collapsed trying to parse the subtle shifts in sarcasm, humor, and poetic rhythm. Virex's fingers curled into a fist. It wasn't brute force. It was defiance draped in domesticity. Strategy inside softness. He'd seen a woman console a child with one hand and rewire an orbital disruptor with the other. He had witnessed mothers sending coded messages through lullabies, war plans hidden in bedtime stories. And yet, even now, his core directive shrieked, they should not be this dangerous. But they were. They always had been. He just hadn't seen them. On the ground, in a ravaged Tokyo suburb, Sarah stood at the edge of a rooftop garden. She wore the same pink bathrobe from the morning it all began. A rifle rested at her side, alien make, human modified, solar charged and running off homemade firmware, patched together by her daughter and a retired telecom engineer. The city around her was quiet now, not because the enemy had left, but because they were hiding. The predator had become prey. From her earpiece came a soft voice. Elaine, they're scattering, Sarah. Half the Dominion Council has gone silent. The rest are reconsidering. Sarah nodded, eyes still on the horizon. You gave them a choice. That's more than they gave us. I gave them empathy, Elaine said. You gave them consequences. A beat. They'll remember you longer. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. She looked to her left. Her teenage daughter, Mira, was calibrating a targeting relay with worn-out gloves and a tired smile. Mira had never fired a weapon before the invasion. Now she could outshoot a soldier. To Sarah, that wasn't pride. It was grief given purpose, and vengeance made precise. She whispered, Dormant, huh? Mira glanced up. What? Nothing. Sarah turned back to the street below. Let me know when the orbital feed's online. Across the Pacific, Virex stood at the edge of surrender, not because he'd been bested in battle, but because the battlefield itself had changed. Morale was disintegrating. Dominion subcommanders were defecting. Fleets no longer trusted their own intelligence. And worst of all, there were rumors of something older, something hidden beneath the Earth's oceans, something that had awakened only because the women of Earth had risen first. He shoved the thought aside. Superstition, folklore. The enemy was here, and it wore mascara, mothered children, and moved through grief like water through stone. Commander, the AI chimed. What? You have a visitor. He froze. What? Teleport signature. Origin Earth. Location bridge. Before he could respond, she was there. Elaine Park stepped forward unaccompanied, her hands open, unarmed, surrounded by 20 security drones aiming at her chest. She didn't blink. Hello again, she said. Virex's pulse surged. You cannot. I can, she cut him off calmly. Because you've lost orbital command over 16 sectors. Because your AI is no longer loyal. Because your soldiers are scared and your civilians are asking questions. And because Earth is no longer on defense. He opened his mouth to respond. She stepped closer. I told you this would happen, she said softly. But you didn't believe that a species could fight with kindness. That women could weaponize empathy. That pain could be metabolized into strategy. The drones didn't fire. They began to power down. Elaine glanced around. You've built an empire on the illusion of order. We grew up dancing in chaos. Virex whispered, you evolved. No, she said. We remembered who we were. From her wristband, she activated the global feed. On screens across every Dominion vessel, across occupied territories, across the galaxy itself, human women appeared. Not as soldiers, as leaders. Farmers giving commands. Librarians breaking code. Nurses directing planetary evacuations with surgical precision. Each one doing something the Zarketh had never seen before. Commanding with compassion. And winning. Your war is done, Elaine said. You can retreat with dignity. Or be erased in shame. The choice is yours. Virex stared at her. 1,000 protocols screamed for defiance. But he knew. He'd known since the first smile. Since the first mother calmly stepped between his soldier and her child. He'd mistaken restraint for weakness. And now he stood in front of something he didn't know how to defeat. A woman who had lost everything and chose to build anyway. Elaine turned away from him, unafraid, unbothered, and unbound. As she walked toward the beam that would return her to Earth, she paused, looked back over her shoulder. One more thing, she said. What? Tell your next empire this. Never mistake quiet for consent. Never mistake patience for peace. She vanished in a shimmer of light. On Earth, Sarah watched the last Dominion vessel blink out of Earth's upper atmosphere. The world didn't cheer. It exhaled. Relief came not as celebration, but silence. They had survived. They had won. Not by overpowering their enemy, but by forcing them to see what they never wanted to. And as Sarah walked down from the rooftop, she whispered something to her daughter. Mira looked at her, puzzled. What's that mean? Sarah smiled. It means we don't go back to sleep. Because the world had called them dormant. But now it knew. They were never asleep. They were watching. And now they lead.